Hi everybody, welcome to our webinar on the new features in KNIME 4.1 and also server version 4.10. My name is Scott Fincher. I'm a data scientist on the education and evangelism team. So welcome in, and also here with me is Cynthia Padilla. She's one of the folks on our customer care team. She's going to be monitoring the chat for questions. As we go, the plan will be I'll show you some slides, I'll do a little bit of live demo for some selected features. And then if you do have questions, please type them in the chat, and we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We'll try to make sure we cover all those questions that you do have. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started. So here's some of the things we're going to talk about today. This isn't everything, but just to give you a general overview. We're going to talk about enhanced usage of components, some new features that we've added along those lines to make them a little bit easier to use. On the machine learning side, we now have some support for guided labeling and weak supervision. I'll talk about some of the nodes that are available in the extension we've added to support that functionality. We have some updates to our file handling as well to make life a little easier if you need to read in multiple files, for example, or to refer to files in a particular way. I'll talk more about that later. We do have some additional integrations that we've been getting requests for a while, so we've built nodes for them. Those include PowerBI, Databricks, and some other stuff that I'll talk about. And then at the end, I'll cover a little bit of what's new with KNIME Server, where we've added some features to help with workflow unification, make that a little more simple and straightforward, and some additional enterprise features as well. So to get started, let me go ahead and talk about some of the things we've added for the KNIME Hub. So hopefully you've already used KNIME Hub a little bit. We released it wide in KNIME 4.0. And if you have, then you know that it allows you to upload, I should say, workflows from your local analytics platform and publish them on the Hub so that anybody can use them. So it's a way to really easily share workflows and preview what's going on with workflows. Not just workflows, but you can also take a look on the Hub at different nodes and different components and extensions and whatnot. And to actually get that information up to the Hub, we have, you can see in the screenshot there, the My KNIME Hub little access point within KNIME Explorer. We've had the public space for a while, but now we have a private space too. So if you want to upload any workflows that you have to make sure that you can access them from the cloud, anywhere you are, just shoot them up to KNIME Hub on the private space instead. And of course, the public space works just like it did before. We've also added the ability to upload components to the Hub in addition to the workflows. So if you have a particular component that you've built, to wrap up some functionality for folks on your team, for example, you want to make sure that everybody can use it to build a particular visualization, maybe something like that. Then you can just drag and drop that component directly to the Hub and back out to the workflow. And I do have a little GIF that kind of shows you how that works. So here we've got somebody who's going to search on the KNIME Hub. He's going to go find this component that he's looking for. In this case, it's Chloropleth World Map. He's going to click on components to filter down to just the available components as opposed to workflows and nodes and other things. Then he's going to drag this component straight into his workflow. There it is, connect it to his existing nodes, make some changes in the dialog, execute it, and then he's going to have a nice little world map that somebody built into a component, right? It doesn't have to be world maps, right? It could be anything, any sort of functionality you can wrap into a component you can use in this way and share it now via the KNIME Hub. So apart from the Hub, we have several usability improvements that we've put into KNIME Analytics Platform. So we'll talk about some of those. I have some slides here that I'll just kind of briefly go over because I think it's more interesting to actually show you them in a demo. So let me skim through some of these slides and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. So the first thing here is we've actually added some space along the right and bottom edges of your workflow that just makes it easier to put new nodes in. You may have noticed in the past if you tried to drag nodes to the edges of the workflow that it could be a little bit fiddly. So now hopefully that should be less frustrating. This one's really cool, the ability to search within the workflow at the level you're at to look for particular nodes. So if I hit Control F or Command F if I'm on a Mac I can search for nodes. I can see, for example, let's type CO here. It's going to bring up anything with with CO in it, and then you can click on that node and it'll take you directly in the workflow to wherever that is. We've made a lot of changes to the appearance of components. I'll show you how that works. You can change the color of them. You can add custom icons. We have in-place editing from the Explorer of shared components, which I'll show you. And then we have some nodes that we've added that help improve data validation so that you have more control over what particular features or fields are allowed to be passed into a component. So we'll look at that too. So here's some slides about that. Let me skip through some of these because I think I would rather just show you. Another really interesting bit is something that we're starting to add for selected nodes. This is dynamic ports. So you can see in the little animated GIF here, we have a concatenate node. And in the past, we had a concatenate node that was an optional input port version. So you had one required input to the concatenate and 3 optional inputs. So if you had more than 4 things that you wanted to concatenate together, you had to put a bunch of these different nodes in series to get everything concatenated. Now you can add as many input ports as you want. So this is supported on a few different nodes right now. We're going to be adding more in the future. One specific application that we'll look at later is enabling a remote connection input for reader and writer nodes. We have a new utility node for the row filter. So you may have already used the row filter node before to build some criteria out. Now you can do it in a little more interesting way. You can provide more complex rules using a tree structure. So you can provide different ands and ors. You can enter these conditions and combine them to get more sophisticated selections using the row filter. Right now, this node is in our labs extension. If you want to try it out, we'd like for you to try it out because once we get feedback from folks, eventually the plan is to move this into the main KNIME core and have this be KNIME's default row filter. So please do check this out if you have an opportunity and let us know what you think about it. And then one last node before I switch over to the demo and show you the top K selector node. So this used to be the element selector node. It was on our active learning extension, but we pulled it out of there because it's so useful for everybody. We have rewritten it to improve the performance and put it in the core KNIME nodes. So what this is going to do is basically combine the functions of 2 different nodes, the sorter and the row filter, so that you can do it all at once. Okay, so that's enough talking about those things. It's much more interesting for you to actually see them. So I mentioned before some extra space around the borders. If I open up a new KNIME project, for example, and I'm just looking at the blank canvas, I don't see this new extra border space, but as soon as I drag in a reader node, for example, you can see, oh, I have extra space at the bottom and extra space at the right. That just makes my life easier if, for example, I need to drag nodes over here. It's a little less painful to organize things. So that one's a simple one, but it's a quality of life improvement. So searching, I showed you how we can use Control F or Command F. If I do that here, right now, you might think I just have one node in this workflow. But if I do Control F, then I can see that I actually have several, and I can type in a string to just limit this to be the file reader, for example. And if I want to find, hey, where's my other file reader node besides the iris data, I can double click and it'll take me down to this portion of my workflow where it is. So you can see how this would be really handy if you have a workflow with 40 or 50 nodes in it. You can't remember where you put that one particular filter, then just Control F and go find it. One thing that we've added about components. So I have a little component over here in my KNIME Explorer called bar chart. If I want to edit this, I can actually double click now within the KNIME Explorer. And when I do that, I get a new canvas that shows me what's inside the component. So there's several things that I could do here. One of them is, this goes to actually changing the appearance of the component. So if I go to the description pane and click the little pencil icon, it allows me to edit things. So I could add a custom description. This node creates a bar chart. Why would I want to bother with the description? Well, if I'm sharing this component on the KNIME Hub, then suddenly it becomes important to have a description, and this is the description that would get published, right? So I can add a little description there. I can also do things like change the color. So this node creates a bar chart for me. So I might want to specify it as a visualizer node. And if you're familiar with the color scheme in KNIME, visualization nodes are generally blue. So if I select the visualizer node, then I'll get this little blue color here. If I decided, well, actually, for whatever reason, because I like, green better, I could select the learner node and get this kind of lime green color. But I'll go ahead and select blue for the visualizer. And then the other thing is I can add a custom icon. So if I have a PNG image, has to be size 16 by 16 or larger, then I can grab it. So I've got one on my desktop right here. And whoops, allow me just a second to switch out so that we can actually see my desktop. Bear with me for just a second. Ha! All right, so I've got my little smiley face guy here that I can drag in. So now, if I were to save this, oh, and actually before I save it, let me scroll down and show you one other thing. You can also specify information about the ports. So by default, the input port for this component, it just has one, is called port 1. I could change that to something else, and I could also provide a little bit of a description about what the input port is supposed to do, so that if I mouse over that input port from my top level of my workflow, I get more information about what's going on. But for the time being, let me go ahead and just save this for the visual aspects. And now, I want to save my changes. Now when I drag this component in to my workflow, I'm going to see that I have indeed a little blue component with a little yellow smiley face in it, right? And then I can execute that. It's going to create a bar chart and go about its business. Another thing that I wanted to show you here was the custom filter configuration in the column filter configuration node. So we've allowed this node now to give you more control about what can come into a particular component and be interacted with downstream. So you can see in the middle here we have this type filter section. I can actually limit, in this case, and have limited my input features to be only strings and only numbers of type double. And beyond that, I can actually require a minimum number of columns that are going to be required to execute this component. So if I say that I'm going to require 2 columns, I can have a custom error message where if the person setting this up doesn't have 2, this error message gets thrown, please choose at least 2 columns. And so you can see how that works if I were to back out of this. Double click on the component to configure it. By default, I'm reading in 5 different variables since this is the classic iris data. Let's say maybe I'm only going to read in 1 variable, and I hit OK, and I get this helpful error message that says, by the way, you need to choose at least 2 columns, because that's exactly what I set up in the column filter configuration node that controls this. And if I were to add in other variables of other types, for an example, an integer here, something like that, that would be disallowed also, because I restricted it to only be doubles and strings that would be allowed. So lots of additional features there that allow you to customize your components, set them up just how you want to, and control what's going on with them. For the dynamic ports, let me show you this. Go ahead and scroll down. I showed the concatenate node in the slides. Here are the 3 little dots. This is how you're going to change it. So you mouse over, it says click to modify ports. If I click, I can add input ports all day long. If we had 20 minutes, I could just keep adding them and it would look ridiculous. But maybe you need to concatenate this many different tables together. That's, we've seen that happen, so this gives you the ability to do it. I'll go ahead and Control Z and get back to just the 2 ports, but you get an idea of how the dynamic ports work there. Here's the row filter that I showed that's in the labs extension. I've already got this set up to work with the adult data set. I'll just show you briefly what the adult data set looks like since we use it in a few examples. Has some information on adults, as you might imagine, things like their age, their education, their marital status, their gender, how much money they make, what country they live in, so on and so forth. So if I wanted to filter some of that information down, I can use the row filter labs node here. And in the configuration dialog, I've already set this up. I get this kind of branching tree view that allows me to specify different groups and different conditions. So I have a couple of different groups here. One that's under an AND heading. So it's basically saying, look for anyone with an age greater than 25 and that has a work class that matches this self-employed thing. So those people would be included in the filter because I have include by query selected and the radio button at the bottom. Also, I'm going to take those folks or any folks that are in this other group. So if their age is between 18 and 25 and their education is bachelor's degree, we'll include those folks as well. And if I want to keep adding stuff, I can. I could add a condition here to have another group to filter by. I'm sorry, another and condition to filter by. I could add another group. I mean, you can go down the line and make this even more complicated if you need to. But for our purposes, I just leave it at what we originally had there. And if you look at the results, you'll see that it's filtered it just like we said it should. So again, that's in labs. This is eventually, our plan is to move this into main KNIME. So check it out, play with it, and if you have comments about how could it be improved, or just let us know. We'd like to hear from you about that. Another node that I want to show you in the demo here, the top K selector node. So I mentioned that this combines the functionality of the sorter and a row filter kind of together. What I could do in this case, I can take my adult data and I can pull out the 4 oldest individuals. How would I do that? Just using this top K selector, 1 node instead of 2. It's pretty easy. If you're used to seeing the sorter node already, then you've seen a dialog that looks a lot like this. You pick the field that you want to sort by, in this case age. Since we're looking for the oldest individuals, we're going to sort descending. And then I just say, how many do I want to return? In this case, it's 4, so the number of rows is 4. If I wanted to, I could add additional columns to sort by, just like in the sorter node, if I needed to do that. I'm not going to do that here. Since it's already executed, you can see that this is exactly what we get. We get the 4 oldest individuals, so 4 90-year-old individuals here. Okay, so those are some of the new nodes and component functionality we've added. Let me switch back to some slides and talk about some other stuff, and we'll do some more demo here in a little bit. So, analytics. This goes to some of the machine learning features, nodes, and functionality that we've added. So one of the things we wanted to focus on in this release is the concept of guided labeling, and then adding in nodes that are going to support that for active learning. So the idea here is that you've got somebody who is going to be presented with a data set, and that data set needs to be labeled in some way. And they're going to be shown something on the screen that says, maybe it's a movie review and they need to classify the movie review in a particular way. Or maybe simpler to understand, something like an image. They're shown an image and they need to identify if it's a dog or a cat or a ball or umbrella or whatever it is. They need to provide a label for the data that's being shown to them. And so we have workflows that will support that and nodes that support it. A bunch of these nodes here, you'll see we're trying to define density distributions and then allow users who are looking at this to selectively label interesting data points in an interactive and iterative way. So they're going to be using this in a loop, and you see the active learning loop start nodes and active learning loop end node. And what's going on within the loop are some of these specific nodes that we've added. So things like the density scorer, the exploration score combiner, the density updater, all of these things, the labeling view, which is what they actually are going, the node that's going to show them the data that they need to label. All of these are happening within a loop. So somebody is shown an image of a cat, they say this is a cat. The loop iterates, now it's a dog, they say it's a dog, and so on and so forth. That information is collected, and those labels are then used to improve the score of the model that you're building. So the way that you would ideally want to do this is within the web portal on KNIME Server. That's where these really shine. If you'd like to try this out yourself, we have workflows available on the KNIME Hub, so we'd encourage you to do that. Just search for guided labeling and active learning. Here's another use case that we've built out and included some new nodes to support. The idea of weak supervision. So this is where you, again, want to label something, but you may not have very good sources for the label at all. Maybe you have a bunch of different sources that have some information in them, but they're just not very good on their own. And we'd like to combine a bunch of these different sources, call them weak sources, into something that is more useful for labeling. So you can see at the beginning of this workflow, we have a couple of weak source components that we join together. We're using this nominal probability distribution creator. We join these together, and then we use these weak label model learner and predictor nodes. So this is going to learn to combine the weak sources that we've provided into a single source that should perform better. And then we can feed the output of the model predictor to a couple of different nodes. We could use either the gradient boosted trees learner or the logistic regression learner, and actually build a model then based on that labeling. So it's a way of automating the labeling process. If this is something that'd be useful for you, we have workflows on the Hub for this as well. So download that and check it out. Something else on the machine learning side is the silhouette coefficient node. So this does pretty much what it says it should do. It calculates silhouette coefficients. So you can, for example, as it's shown in this little toy workflow here, we could use k-means, and it's going to calculate in the first output port the coefficient for each row, but then you also get a summary as well of the coefficients for each cluster and overall in the second output port. If you want to, you can also calculate a distance matrix and use that as an optional input too, like you see on the bottom branch here with the k-medoids node that is then that is then used along with the numeric distances node to calculate in the silhouette coefficient. So this is something that if you're doing a lot of unsupervised clustering analysis, you want to be able to calculate this. Now we have a node to help you do that. More ML stuff. So we have an integration now with AWS personalization nodes. So we have 8 new nodes here that support Amazon Personalize, and they're there to help you build out a recommendation system using Amazon service. So think of a shopping cart, right? When you go on to Amazon and you buy some mouthwash and you buy some toothpaste, then the system is probably smart enough to know that it should recommend you different types of toothbrushes, right? So how do they do that? They have a system for doing it, and they've made this personalized system available for other folks now to be able to do it for their information. So you can use our nodes to help you do that. You see several of the different nodes here, for example, uploading information about users, uploading information about items and interactions. Once you provide that information to Amazon Personalize, then you can use the Create Solution Version node to come up with different rankings for particular groups of users and items. And once you come up with something you like, you can deploy the solution as a campaign using the Create Campaign node. Once you have the campaign created, then you can use that campaign on completely new data, unseen data that you didn't use to build the model, to come up with personalization, recommendations, and rankings and so forth. You do have to pay for the Amazon Personalized service, but these nodes just provide you an easy way to get access to it without having to write any code, right? So this is something that would be interesting to you. Definitely check out some of our example workflows there. Okay, here's one we're going to do another demo for. This is my favorite node in the whole release, personally, because I'm a data science nerd and I just like this stuff. So let me show you what's going on here. It's more interesting to see it in action than it is to see a screenshot. So let me switch back over to KNIME. And I've got a little workflow here. So again, for this demonstration, we're going to use the adult data. And what we're going to try and do is predict income. In this particular case, in the adult data set, individuals are classified as either making less than or more than $50,000 per year. There's only 2 options, so that makes it a binary classification problem. So what we can do is we can partition this data into a training set and a test set. The training set comes out of the top port of the partitioning node and goes to a random forest learner node where that model is built. Then we use the test data along with the model that we just built in the random forest predictor to predict the income, whether or not somebody makes less than or greater than $50,000. And in here, we can append the individual class probabilities in the random forest predictor. This is an important thing to do if you want to build a ROC curve, for example. And since we are going to build a ROC curve, we definitely want to make sure that's enabled. And so once we've built our model and we've actually made some predictions with it, we would like to see how well the model performs. There's different ways we can do that. We could look at a confusion matrix. We could look at a ROC curve. And the binary classification inspector is going to do those things for us. So I've already executed it here, but let me go ahead and pull up the interactive JavaScript view. So what we have at default are some simple scoring metrics. So we have the area under the curve on the left-hand side, and we have the accuracy here. This is the maximized accuracy. And then we also have the associated ROC curve on the right-hand side. So this is all well and good, but where it gets more interesting is if I click, for example, on the accuracy, I get a whole new dialog at the bottom that's going to give me the confusion matrix. So I have my correct predictions here in blue, my incorrect predictions here in red on the opposite diagonal. And the threshold by default is set to 0.5. This is the probability threshold. When we calculated the predicted probabilities in the previous node, in the predictor node, it's basing its prediction based on whether the probability is less than or greater than 0.5. But we can change this threshold, and this may make our model be more effective if we do that. And so you can see if I drag this left and right, and I go up and down the ROC curve, that things are changing. If I get to the far tail end, my model gets much less accurate. But there's other things that are changing too. You can actually see the values in the confusion matrix changing as well. Now there may be other things that I'm interested in apart from the accuracy. So if I want to go up here to the little stats dialog, I can add additional things. Maybe I'd like to include the sensitivity and the specificity as well. Maybe the balanced accuracy too. So I can add all of those in. And now if I change the threshold, I can see how all of them are changing at once. So if I'm more concerned about getting a reasonable balance between specificity and sensitivity, then I can actually see, where I can make a good balance for those. Or if I need to maximize one or the other, I can actually click on this little custom thing here and say, hey, find me the threshold where the sensitivity is maximized. And if I do that, it's 0. Or maybe I care about accuracy again, and then the max accuracy is about 0.58. So it'll find that for me automatically. I don't have to just drag it back and forth. But it's just kind of fun to see how things vary. Okay, so definitely play around with this if you have use cases for where you're doing predictions on binary classification. This is a super useful node, and it combines for you in an interactive way some of the things that you would have had to do separately before, like generate the ROC curve yourself, generate a bar chart yourself with these different metrics, generate the confusion matrix. It would have required several different nodes, and now you can just do it all in one node and drag a bar and play around with it. Okay, that's my personal favorite node of the release, but let me switch back over to slides and show you some other stuff. Integrations. Okay, so we've added some nodes into KNIME that will allow you to access data that you may have out on different types of clusters. One of those is Databricks. So we have this new Create Databricks Environment node that you see on the left-hand side down here at the bottom. It's going to allow you to connect to a Databricks cluster on AWS or on Azure, and then you can do different things depending on how you connect to that cluster. So you can see on the top branch of this little workflow, we're accessing the Databricks environment, and then we're using KNIME's kind of regular DB nodes to select a table, do some row sampling, and then take a sample of that data and bring it back to KNIME, right? We could do that. We could also use the blue port in the middle to access the Databricks file system directly and just read stuff in our environment using a Parquet reader, for example, directly into KNIME. Or maybe we would like to do a little bit of model development in our Databricks environment. In that case, we can use the file system node and the file system port and the Spark port on the Create Databricks environment node and use those downstream. So here we have an ORC to Spark node, which then goes to a Spark k-means node to build an unsupervised clustering model, and then a Spark entropy score to actually figure out how well that model is performing. So there's all sorts of different stuff you can do here, and then the idea is, right, that the processing that you're doing is actually happening on your cluster. You're not bringing data back to KNIME unless you specifically tell it to. All the processing on your large data sets is happening out there where you have the CPU and computing resources to back it up. But you still have this visual way of orchestrating what's going on with your analysis. Similarly, we have new nodes that allow you to connect to Google too. So Google Cloud Storage, Google BigQuery, and Google Cloud Dataproc. So this is kind of a similar workflow to what I just showed you. If you look on the top branch, now we're not using Databricks, we're using Google Authentication, and then here's a Google BigQuery connector. Downstream from that, once I use the BigQuery connector, I can again use KNIME's regular DB nodes to interact and pull information out of that database. Similarly, we could use a Google Cloud Storage connection. Maybe I'd like to pick an individual file that's sitting out there and grab it. I could use the Google Cloud Storage file picker to get the URL of that file and send that downstream for additional processing. Or if I want to play around with Google Cloud Dataproc, then I could also do that. Connect a Create Spark Context Livy node to my Google Cloud Storage connection node, and then downstream here I'm converting from Parquet to Spark, do some partitioning, build a random forest, do some predictions with my random forest, and then use a score to see how it all turned out. So similar idea to what we showed before, but right, just now you're connecting to Google instead of Databricks. The nodes are different, but the concepts are largely the same, and you're still pushing the processing down into your cluster. We do have some new DB connectors and utility nodes. So for those of you out there who are using Vertica or Amazon Athena, we now have nodes that will allow direct support for those. You don't have to fiddle around with your JDBC driver connections and so forth as much. We have nodes that will help you do that. And there are some additional utility nodes as well on the DB side. And I won't highlight all of them, but a really interesting one is this DB transaction start and DB transaction end pair. So you see those in purple at the bottom below. We have this little workflow that's reading in some information and doing in the middle of this start and end loop several things. Maybe we're doing an insert of some external data, then we're merging from somewhere else, and then we're deleting from a different table, and so on and so forth. If we have these different functions between the start and end nodes, the idea here is that we want all of these to finish. And if for some reason one of them fails, then we'd like to do none of them, right? So we'd like all of these functions to be considered as a single transaction. If they're all successful, then my DB transaction end node will fire off the appropriate flow variable port and say, hey, I can basically send myself an email, let me know this all worked great. Or if any one of these or more fail, then the DB transaction end node will fire off a different port, and I can send myself an email that, oops, things aren't so great, I need to go check on what's going on with my database. So it just gives you more control over, large, if you have a bunch of these different functions you need to execute at once, and you need to be sure that they executed properly, you can use these new start and end nodes to help you govern that a little bit better. Some other functionality here, we've been getting requests for a PowerBI node for a while now, so we made one, and it does pretty much what it says on the tin, send to PowerBI, does exactly that. So it's going to take any files that you have from KNIME and send them to PowerBI. One of the nice things is that it does support the native KNIME types, including things like date and time. So if you've already done some pre-processing on that in an ETL workflow, and you can send those to PowerBI, it'll still be okay. The authentication is via OAuth, and you can see that in the configuration dialog here. Basically, you just click the authenticate button. You'll be presented a little web page. You can enter your credentials, choose to store them or not, and then select what workspace you want to use, whether you want to append to a different data set or not, or create a new one. All of that's there. So this is one of those quality of life things, hopefully make your life easier. If you need to get things out of KNIME, move them over to Power BI, we've got something that'll help you do that now. Here's another node for accessing a different type of data, the MDF Reader. MDF stands for Measurement Data Format. This is used in a lot of places, but probably the most common is in the automotive industry. So if in the US, for example, if you were to hook up a scanner to your OBD port on your car, then you might be able to get some information about how your car is running, and if it's streaming data, there's a good chance it's going to be in MDF format. So that particular format, comes with a lot of different channels. You can see in the screenshot here, maybe you're only interested in particular channels of the data in the MDF file. So our dialog will help you choose what you need to be able to do processing downstream. This node does use Python in the background, so you have to have KNIME set up with Python. That's a one-time setup thing that you can do. The other thing is you need to make sure that the appropriate library, Python library I should say, is installed in your Python environment, but this is all described in the node description for the MDF Reader. So if you're playing around with these types of files, don't have to read them in manually anymore. Enhanced variable support. So we've added some new flow variable types. You are probably already familiar, if you use flow variables, with the existing types in KNIME. You can use integers and strings and doubles, but we were a little bit limited there. We didn't allow you access to everything, so we added some more. So the new ones that we've added are Boolean type, long type, and probably most interesting are arrays. So you can actually pass arrays of strings now as flow variables. Why was this, would this be useful? We have a simple use case here at the bottom where maybe I have some data in this bottom branch of the workflow. I want to read in some information, and then I would like to filter out multiple columns at a time. If I manually set up my column filter, I can filter as many or as few columns as I want. But if I want to automate that process, the easy way to do it would be able to pass an array of strings and say, filter everything in this array, for example. So if I have this create column collection node, I can pass information from a table, basically make a list of these different strings, and then when I use the table row to variable node, KNIME is going to know, oh, I should convert this list into an array. And when you do have an array in KNIME, we have some little icons in the flow variable tab that indicates it's an array. So filter type is just the S, so that's a regular string. But now you see this little guy, included names, excuse me, it's an S with little open close parentheses by it. That indicates that that's now an array. So that's how you know when you're looking at the flow variables column what you have. So feel free to play around with these new types. Let us know what you think. Come up with some cool new use cases for them. Hopefully they help you automate your workflows a little bit better. Another thing here, KNIME supports Apache Knox now. So what's Apache Knox? It's an application gateway for interacting securely with REST APIs and user interfaces in the Apache Hadoop framework. So you can use it to work with HDFS or Hive or Spark behind an Apache Knox gateway. There are a bunch of other APIs there too. It's not just those three. So if this is something that's useful to you, you're using Apache Knox, hopefully this will help things be smoother for you. If you're not sure about what Knox is, you can get more information at the website there, knox.apache.org. File handling. So let me show you a couple more slides here and then switch over to a new demo. I did want to demo this portion. So the file handling is going to do a couple of new things for you that hopefully will make your life easier. One is accessing KNIME relative workflow paths more easily. So if you've used the KNIME:// syntax before and you haven't been exactly sure where that's pointing to on your drive, or maybe you just couldn't remember the syntax, we have a different way of doing this now that hopefully is a little more intuitive. The other thing we've changed about the file handling framework is the ability to bulk read a bunch of different files at once. So I'll show you that here in a second. And then one other node I wanted to show in the demo is the Webpage retriever. So this is a node that's going to let you read HTML content from the web, either as just a giant string of HTML, basically, or in an XML format. It's based on our existing REST nodes, so if you're already used to using the GET request, PUT request, POST request nodes, the interface will seem similar to you in that it allows support for headers, for authentication, for what you do with cookies, things like that. It'll feel similar. It's basically just going to allow you to pull stuff from the web so that you can do some downstream processing with it. So let's see how the new file handling and the new web page retriever works. So I've got a little example here. In this case, I have my Excel reader that's connected to an Amazon S3 connection from Labs. You can see that this little blue port here has a slightly different color, maybe almost an aqua color, that represents this new file handling connection. So the idea here is that if I had a bunch of Excel spreadsheets sitting in an S3 bucket somewhere, I make that connection and then my Excel reader could read all of them at once. If I double click on the configuration, I'm not actually connected to an S3 bucket right now, but if I were, Amazon S3 would be in black and not red. And then I could browse to the folder in the S3 bucket where it is. But let's say maybe I wasn't reading from S3. Let's say maybe I wanted to use the KNIME relative paths. This is the KNIME / syntax that you may be familiar with, I can actually select that from these drop downs now. So I could say relative to, and then is it relative to my workflow or to my mount point or to a particular node even, and then I can click the browse button and it's going to take me to in the file system where my workflow is. So it makes it just a little bit easier to navigate and point to different files or whatever you need to point to that has an internal reference in your workflow. I also can, instead of just reading a single file, I could read all the files in a folder, and I could do that even recursively if I wanted to by clicking the Include Subfolders button, browse to that folder, and read in this example, a bunch of Excel spreadsheets. Now I'd want them to have the same format, but the idea is that you can read a bunch of them in at a time. In the past, what we would do is we'd use an Excel reader and we'd put a loop around it, which is maybe a little more complicated than it needed to be. So this new file handling structure will allow you to bulk read files without having to use loops anymore. So we encourage you to play around with that. I will show you just briefly, when you bring in an Excel reader, it won't look like this with the port on it. It'll look like you're just used to seeing the orange Excel reader, except now it has the 3 dots at the bottom left-hand corner. If I click on that to modify the ports, that's where I can add the new file system connection port. So right now, this just connects to the Amazon S3 connection, but we'll be adding more nodes in the future that allow for this bulk file handling port. And then for the web page retriever, I wanted to go down and show you a simple workflow. So what I'm doing in this particular workflow is, the idea is we want to pull images that are embedded within a Wikipedia article. So we have a little component here that'll allow us to select a Wikipedia article, in this case one called machine learning. Then we do a little bit of manipulation with the flow variables to create the appropriate Wikipedia formatted URL. We feed that to the web page retriever node using a flow variable. So this field up here is not /unicorn, right? It's /machine learning because we've changed it with a flow variable. But this is just going to allow you to select the URL. You've got the ability to do authentication if you want. You've got the ability to set particular headers if you need to do that. All very similar to our existing REST nodes. And then what are the results? In this case, I've said, go ahead and give me an HTML string. Since I've already run it, I get a pretty giant string, which you'll see here in a second, is the web page, right? This is just a bunch of HTML that we've used the web page retriever to grab. And then downstream from the web page retriever, we do some extraction in this little meta node here. And then we have a table view, which will allow us to select different images. So when we look at this table, it says, hey, I found in the HTML that the web page retrieval node pulled out, I found here's an SVG, here's a PNG, here's some other SVGs. I can click on those to see, oh, look, here's the hyperplane for a support vector machine example, right? So it just gives you an idea of the kind of things that you could pull with the web page retriever, what kind of web scraping you might want to do. Please let us know if you have feedback about this one. We'd be happy to hear it. Maybe ideas for future improvements for this nodes or other nodes that could work alongside of it. Okay. Back to slides for just a moment. All right, let me talk about some of the features on KNIME Server that have been introduced with the latest version 2. So we have, on the managed customization side now, the ability to set multiple update sites. Why would you want to do this? Well, if you're a company that has a pretty tight lockdown on your internet, you might want to host multiple update sites on your own network instead of pointing to KNIME update sites for whatever reasons. You may also want to avoid dealing with proxy situations that can happen. You just set up your own internal site, and that way users that are connected to your KNIME server, they get this managed customization profile pushed to them, and then they'll be connecting to update sites that you control. So if you, for example, wanted to make sure that your users don't have access to particular extensions, or you just want to control what they're able to install and not install, you can do that. That's the bottom line with these managed customizations. Scheduled parameterization now. So when you execute a workflow on the server, on a KNIME server, you've had the standard options and the scheduling options before, and now you get these configuration options. So if you use configuration nodes in your workflow, you can use those to set up these additional inputs, basically. So I see several of them here. Select the file to read, enter the credentials, specify a time frame over which the workflow should run when it runs. All of this can be set up using configuration nodes, and then the ability to change that will appear under this configuration options tab. So it just gives you more control before you even execute something, what your input should be to that workflow. Something else that you can do now is define particular workflow actions upon completion. So if I check this little box to call workflows upon completion, I can say, all right, when something happens with this workflow, do something else. So in this case, on success is checked for this workflow, O1 customer segmentation. When this particular workflow is scheduled and it finishes, if everything is nice and happy, then it's going to call this other workflow. You can easily see how you could chain a bunch of those different workflows together. If this workflow fails after its scheduled execution, then I'm going to run a different workflow, test remove copy, which maybe gets rid of my mangled workflow and emails me a summary of the errors or something like that, right? So there are just more options here about what's going to happen when a workflow executes and what should happen next. Something else now supported on KNIME Server is advanced authentication. So we're going to support single sign-on, SSO, based on OAuth. So when someone logs into the server, either via the web portal or via the KNIME Analytics Platform client, then they can click and be presented with a web page that they can log in on now. So hopefully take some of the frustration of setup of some of the sign-in away and just makes it a little more straightforward by using SSO via OAuth. Okay, that is all the stuff that I wanted to cover with you today. So the upshot is now it's time to update to 4.1. Try out all these new features. I know I've said this several times, but please give us feedback. We really do want to hear from you about what's working, what's not, where your pain points are, things that we could do better, because you guys are the power users on this webinar, and so you know best about that sort of information. So it's really valuable to us. If you're a little nervous about, should I update? Is it going to break my workflows? It won't. Your workflows are going to work just fine with the new version of KNIME. We're super careful about backwards compatibility. We are always wanting to make sure that stays safe. So go ahead and try it out, and your workflows will still be okay. A few closing items. Since you guys show up for the webinar, we like to make sure we give you some additional materials too. So if you haven't had a chance to check these books out, we have several books available on our KNIME Press website, knime.com/KNIMEpress. Some of the three listed here are beginner's luck, advanced luck, and then if you do any NLP or text mining work from words to wisdom. You can apply this coupon code webinar-0220 and get access to all of those books downloadable for free. And then also we have the KNIME Spring Summit 2020. This is coming up in just a few weeks at the end of March at the BCC Berlin Congress Center in Berlin. So on Monday and Tuesday we do a bunch of different courses that are taught by our data science and evangelism team, everything from just getting started with KNIME, beginner stuff, all the way through time series, text analytics, big data, KNIME Server specific courses. We really cover the range of what's available there for different users. We try to. And then on Wednesday and Thursday we have summit sessions from companies that use KNIME. They bring presentations about their use cases, what they're doing, and then on Friday some optional workshops. It's a really good opportunity to just meet the user community, see how other folks are using KNIME, and interact with one another. And plus, we get to meet a bunch of folks from the KNIME team too. If you'd like to register, use the same code, webinar-0220. You can get 10% off, and you can register at knime.com/summit. And then finally, we are hiring. So if you've been using KNIME for a while and you think maybe you have something you could contribute to the team, we'd like to hear from you. Check it out at knime.com/careers. Maria is our person who handles incoming HR requests. You can drop her a line. or you can email us at knime@jobs.workablemail.com. But check out our open positions, see if anything's a good fit for you, and then drop us a note. And that is it, except for we'd like to do a little bit of Q&A. So let me switch over now and make sure that I have my camera on. And I'll slide over to the side. Hey, everybody. This is Cynthia.
Good to see you. Thank you, Scott. It was a great webinar. Appreciate it. So we're going to go over some of the questions that came through the chat. We try to answer all the questions on the chat as well. But if you don't get an answer, please reach out to us, and we'll get somebody to get you.
Yeah, you can even put them in the comments for this webinar once it gets posted. This webinar will be posted, the recording will, so that if you're not watching it live, other people could use it. So you could always post comments there too. We'll be watching those as well.
Okay. So the first question is in general, when you open a KNIME file, is the positioning of the nodes in the save file fixed? I assume they mean workflow or...
Yeah, so when you open a workflow, the nodes should be where you put them the last time that you saved it. So it's going to remember the positioning that's written into the file as part of the workflow.
Great. Second question, do you have tips for how to work in gradient algorithms?
So we have different nodes available that use gradient boosting, for example. So there's a gradient boosting tree algorithm. There's XGBoost, which uses some gradient boosting, right? Do I have tips for how to work with those, like general tips? I guess what I would suggest to you is if you're looking for examples, you can always check out the KNIME Hub. We have examples using those nodes in particular, gradient boosted trees, XGBoost, and then in our parameter optimization extension, I know we have some parameter optimization example workflows that are, I can't remember if it's for XGBoost or for gradient boosted trees, but one of them will, it has lined out for you what are good parameters to tweak as part of building those models. So that's probably more of a general answer than you wanted, but hopefully it helps a little bit. Check that out on the hub, search for gradient boosting or XGBoost.
In terms of support for KNIME and Hadoop Spark integration for Hadoop and Cloudera distributions, what versions of Spark is supported?
Okay, so we support Spark 1.2 and higher, as well as all versions of Spark version 2. I think, what are we up to, 2.4 now?
Yeah, and we do have, if you go to KNIME documentation under server, we do have a document that talks about our integration with the Spark and how to install it, and all the versions are in there if you have additional questions.
Yeah, so we should support everything that you would need there. So.
Okay, next question. On Azure AWS integration, does KNIME component connect to Azure AWS components like SQL, DW, SQL Server, Redshift?
That is a good question that I, as a data scientist, don't know the answer to, unfortunately.
Okay. We do have a We have a connector for Redshift.
I was going to say that we have a Redshift connector, but I don't want to speak too much out of turn about it because I haven't used it much myself. But yeah, as far as the SQL, DW, SQL, I would need to check on that. So I'm not sure offhand what is available.
Yeah, the SQL Server you can connect with the SQL Server connector. We have to check. We can get back to you on the SQL Data Warehouse DW connection.
Okay.
Okay, and one last question. When we'll be able to use relative paths in all nodes like download node?
When? I don't know. I can't put a pin on that and put a date on it, but I would say this. If you're interested in the download node, if there are other particular nodes that you would be interested in having that functionality for, please post about it on the forum, make a feature request. The more that we see of that on the forum, the more requests we get, and the more likely the development team is to give priority to it. So while I can't say, it's going to be in X release, please let us know what your preferences are so that we can prioritize our development appropriately. Thank you for that.
Well, thank you. That's all the questions we'll cover today.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming. Be sure to tell folks, who are interested in KNIME and the new features about the recording of this webinar. Definitely, check us out on the social media channels, Twitter and LinkedIn in particular, where we're pretty active. And then for sure, absolutely come check us out on the KNIME forum. If you have any questions, we'll follow up with you there as soon as we can. Okay, thanks everybody. Hope you've enjoyed it.